Hey, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Let's Talk About It. This is Susan Johnson, and I'm here with my co-host, Dennis O'Brien, and we have a wonderful guest this evening. It's going to talk to us about all kinds of things that are happening in town, all kinds of experiences he's had as the mayor of Hartford. Luke Bronin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Susan. Thanks, Dennis. It's great to be with you.
Yeah.
He's going to talk about what town? Hartford?
Hartford.
I hope so.
Well, that's where he was. Yeah.
I think he was the mayor. Luke was the mayor of Hartford for 8 years.
Yes.
I think
That's what the calendar says. It felt like 20.
Probably
I remember
did.
from Jesus Christ Superstar when Jesus is singing. Lord knows I tried for 3 years. Seems like 30, and it made me think of that when I thought of you doing 8 years in Hartford, because I think it's the toughest CEO job in the public CEO job in the state. I really do.
I think that Luke might agree with you. Although I think that the way the state has set up our urban areas, I think it's made most urban areas some of the toughest. But being in Hartford, I think that it's kind of been been treated maybe put in a more difficult situation than maybe some of the other very difficult situations our urban areas have been put in.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm not going to disagree with you, Dennis. I think it's not an easy job, but it's a great job, and it's a great
sure.
city,
Yeah.
and I loved it. And one of the things I loved about it is that you are face to face with both your successes and your failures every single day, and if you care about the work, there's no place better to do it, because you can see and feel the work that you do, and it is challenging. I think the way that our state is built, a lot of towns, not just our big cities, but a lot of our towns are put in a really tough position. We're so dependent on property taxes. There's often such a huge mismatch between the size of a property tax base and the amount of need in a community, and a lot of communities struggle with that. I think we were able to move the needle on a lot of things that we got done. And there was a lot of stuff I wish we could have gotten done, but that's what it's sometimes just time to pass the baton.
Well, I wanted to just back up a bit, though, before we get into all those kinds of details about the difficulty that we put our towns in. And you're right, it's not just the urban areas, but the urban areas do serve their regions, whereas the more rural areas can't and don't serve the regions like the urban areas do, with homeless shelters and public housing and hospitals and universities and all that. But I did want to back up about just a little bit, having the people here listening to the show about your background, your service in the military, your work for Governor Malloy, and that sort of thing. Tell us a little bit about those things and how you made the progress into becoming the mayor of Hartford.
Yeah, it was sort of a haphazard and an unplanned path, I guess. I mean, as you know, so it was 8 years as mayor, but for the 2 years before I ran for mayor, I was the general counsel, which is the chief legal counsel to Governor Malloy, and so that was from 2013 to 2015. And I loved that work. That was a time we got to work on a lot of really consequential things, including common sense gun laws in the wake of Sandy Hook. A big push to try to end chronic homelessness for veterans in the state, which I think we as a state and as Connecticut residents should be really proud of, because we were national leaders in that work. And of course, that work is never done, but we really made tremendous progress. A lot of environmental initiatives and criminal justice work that I felt really strongly about. So loved that job. And then, before that, for the 4 years before that, I was down in the Obama administration. So I was at the U.S. Treasury Department for 4 years, from the beginning of 2009, so right in the wake of the financial crisis. Yes. And a lot of the work at that first year and a half was about post-crisis response, and specifically about working on what became the Dodd-Frank Act, which is the Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act, which set up the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. And did a number of other important things.
Oh, please do explain that a little bit, because that was one of Elizabeth Warren's projects. And I just want to, that is the first year or so, it saved the people in the country about $6 billion. It
was hugely important.
Huge.
And as you know, it's had a target on its back ever since for people trying to roll back that reform.
Yes.
But it's made a huge difference in trying to fight back against exploitative lending practices, against abuses in payday lenders, abuses in auto loans, abuses. I mean, back to veterans, abuses targeting veterans, abuses in home lending, in so many different arenas. It's made a huge difference, and it's still the target of a lot of the attacks right now from the right. But I think that's one of those things that. To me, at least, gives me faith in the government's ability to your ability as leaders of public servants to make a difference in a way that really affects people's lives. So it was a crazy time to be in the Treasury Department in that time. I got there a couple weeks before the famous bank stress tests, and then was part of that team doing Dodd-Frank, and then. I was a reservist at the time. I was a Navy reservist. Then I had a deployment to Afghanistan, and was there for about 7 months, kind of in between the times at Treasury. And I was a Navy intelligence officer, but I ended up working on the anti-corruption task force that the military set up. Was not, I would safe to say, was not a successful task force, and was not a mission destined for success. But it was. It was. I'm glad to have been able to do a part, and then when I came back, I sort of stayed in that arena and ran an office in the Treasury Department that was focused on international illicit finance. It was called the Office of Terrorist Financing and Financial Crime. So it was focused on trying to keep money out of the hands of terrorist organizations, as well as a lot of the policy and diplomacy around sanctions. And at the time, a lot of that was about turning up the heat on Iran to try to get them to the negotiating table to do the Iran nuclear deal that Trump then ripped up. It was I loved that work. I loved that job, but it was on the road all the time, and it was not sustainable on the home front. So we decided it was time to come back to Connecticut. So.
Well, we're sure glad you came back here and shared some of the wonderful experiences that you have. And I guess you've served during all kinds of, trauma times, including 2013 to 2015 was when I served as chairman of public health in the legislature, and that was during the Sandy Hook period. And that was when we ran 2 sessions at the same time, to the emergency session to address the problems with gun violence and the issues surrounding Sandy Hook, and then also just the regular session. So a lot of people misunderstood how we conducted that, but we did do both, and it was a devastating time for the state of Connecticut. And you always know exactly where you were when you heard about this horrible tragedy that happened in Sandy Hook. And we were in Germany, and we saw it on BBC News and got a call. It was a different time frame, so we got a call about 2 a.m. from then the executive director of Generations, Arvind Shah, to say, what are we going to do? And it was quite a difficult time as chairman of public health, and but we did accomplish a lot. We were able to stop the sale of the AR-15s, and we put the sale of the magazines down to 10 bullets, and we did a lot of things that I think were very, very positive red flag laws. We were innovative in that area where we were able to do the red flag laws. So we did do a lot of things, and of course it was with your help and the help of the Malloy administration that we got a lot of that work done, because we all worked together as a group to make sure our state was safer.
Yeah, and I think Connecticut has remained a leader in pushing for common sense gun laws, and of course we've had Chris Murphy at the national level as the single most effective and powerful voice, for that work. And just this last session, there was another bill that was passed into law that made some important reforms. I do think that we as a country still have not tackled gun violence with the seriousness that we need to tackle it with.
No.
And I think even in this state, I do feel like there is more for us to do, and it's not just in the form of changing laws on guns. This last session, one of the things I pushed for, for me, criminal justice reform was an issue that I've always been deeply passionate about, and set up a reentry welcome center as one of the earliest things that we did when I came into Hartford, and I, at the same time, one of the things that I saw in our city was the time and again, our community was being traumatized, and people were losing their lives at the hand of as a result of gun violence. And the truth is, I didn't think we were holding repeat serious firearm offenders accountable enough. The people who would be shooting, who would be out on probation or parole or pretrial release, and would still be shooting in the community. Mm-hmm. And I didn't think we were doing enough. And the bill that the General Assembly passed last year, that myself and a coalition of mayors had advocated for, was part of that gun package. And I think that actually was an important piece of that as well. But I still think there's a lot more for us to do in terms of thinking about how to make our criminal justice system more effective, and how to make our anti-gun violence efforts and our prevention work more effective than it is right now.
Well, I agree with you completely, and I also think that we need to take a real serious look at the people who are seriously violent, people who have a serious violent violence history in terms of the fact that they were arrested and convicted for violent acts. People who stab, people who absolutely shoot, people who murder and rape women, people who are first-degree sex offenders. They really need to be categorized in a different way than other people who are not violent. And I am not sure where we need to go, but I think when we could start looking at people who are first-degree violent offenders, whether it's assaults or some other type of first-degree violent offense, we need to have them categorized in a different way and stop conflating them with other people who are not violent like that.
Yeah, and I do think it's also important to recognize, though, that people can and do change, right? That we don't have to be a society of permanent punishment, but we do have to be a society of effective response to crime and an effective response, especially to violence. That's why, this focus on those who are involved in repeatedly inflicting violence on a community, I think it was a really important step forward. But one of the issues we have right now is that our court system is backlogged.
Right.
You have, regardless of what laws there are on paper, you have a court system where there are hundreds of homicide cases pending.
Right.
And sometimes for years, and many hundreds of assault with a firearm pending. And so if, regardless of what's on paper, if the system isn't able to respond in a swift way and in a predictable way, it's a problem. And I think that's something we still have some work to do to make better.
Justice delayed is justice denied, right. And it's something that we're having a problem with. And of course, I'll never forget my first term when under Malloy, the Malloy administration. I think it was Malloy. It could have been Rel, because my first term was with Rel. But there was $77 million cut to the court system, and we've never made it up. And of course, that's how our Valley Street courthouse got shut down for use. I think they do pre-hearings, that kind of thing, but they don't utilize it for much else.
My turn? Okay, I guess I started in the middle by bringing up Hartford, and Susan wanted to go back, and I want to go back as far as your days at Yale, or your schoolboy days up in New Hampshire. But that's how I usually start. And I've always told Susan that we should start with a resume type.
See,
thing.
I listened to you, Dennis.
But I jumped in, right, and I asked, and I said I had to say. The thing that was most on my mind when I think of you is having that great job in Hartford, doing a great job, and it is a great job. It's a great job for some people who want to get things done and want to attack problems, and that's exactly. I feel that way too. I would love to have tried something like that myself in my career, absolutely. But you did, and you did a wonderful job. And the only thing, any regret I have about you is that you left office. I mean, I but you did serve 8 years, and you accomplished an awful lot. When you started, the town was considering going bankrupt. And I'm very familiar with Hartford. I grew up right next door in New Britain, and I spent a lot of time playing basketball at the Southwest Boys Club, and I worked at the Hartford Post Office for 3 or 4 years when I was in college at Hartford UConn and then in law school. But I think it's you talk about structural problems, like, for example, on the federal level, you have, Montana and Idaho have 2 senators and California has 2. All right, that's a serious structural problem that I don't know that we can overcome. I don't know if we can fix that. I mean, politically, that'd be tough. That's a heavy lift. But we also have in Connecticut, we have in my view, I was on the town council in Wyndham for 6 years, and I'm not an expert on municipal law, but I've also been a town attorney in a lot of towns. I think you and I have talked about this before. I think there are too many towns. There are definitely too many school districts.
Oh, I think, as we've said, I think you and I have both said, one thing you could definitely say is that if you were building a state from scratch, you would not take a state of 3.5 million people and cut it up into 169 towns and then duplicate every single service in every single one.
Right.
We're not going to erase our municipal boundaries anytime soon, and
No. You're right.
And we don't need to. But we have to figure out ways to act together more effectively.
I think it's more important to deal with school systems. There are around 200 school boards, school systems, because we have the regional schools and whatnot, and I think that is a problem. I think it's a real problem for 7 towns, especially. There are more, but there's 7 that have the largest problem with the achievement gap. Okay, and you're obviously Hartford is one of them. My hometown of New Britain is another, and my adopted town of Wyndham Willimantic is a third out of the 7, and it is. I'm in favor of consolidation of school districts, especially around those 7 urban center towns, because if you have a school district that includes, once you set up a larger school district with more towns involved, then you cannot have that school district segregated among the schools. There's a law about that, and I think we're perfectly set up for economic and racial segregation in our schools, and it's happened, and we're trying to address it by. I'm making a speech now. Yeah, I get a chance to talk. So, we've got charter schools. We've got we got magnet schools, and to me, as a former children's court judge in the children's court out here, which I specialized in children's cases, I would, for one thing, I would consider in the towns that are the 7 impacted towns, maybe the 30 that are getting special attention from the state. I would start school at 3 years old, and because I ran into so many impoverished families whose kids were not going to preschool, and because it's voluntary. And I suppose it's voluntary now because you could always do homeschooling. That's a problem too, I think, in some instances. But fragmentation is really the enemy in Connecticut, I think, and that's, you're right. It's not going to be fixed overnight, and it's not going to be fixed overnight. But I think the easiest fix and the most important fix is schools, because I think if we're gonna address our poverty problem, where kids are failing in school. We have jobs that are open, and we can't fill them because there's lots of people out there that could if they had a minimum of technical skill training, and it's not happening. We're moving in that direction, starting with Governor Malloy, and carried on by Governor Lamont. We are doing better with creating opportunities through the trade schools and whatnot, and I think we're moving in the right direction. But it is a heavy lift, and I just learned from Susan about how a part of your utility bill is equity, and you pay for that. We're paying for everybody who fails in school and can't pay their electric bill. Everybody else is paying for it. So what we need to do is somehow convince the people living in the suburban towns that they should help us to fix this problem. And right for now, you were able to get the state to help you out in Hartford when you were in that bad situation, okay? Because I got tired of reading in the Current. I've been getting the Current since I was a little kid. I got tired of reading in the Current about people from surrounding towns, certain people, criticizing Hartford. Why can't Hartford do this? Why can't Hartford do that when they're living in Manchester or places like that? So that's, I'm going to stop now and let you talk.
Well, there's a lot there, Dennis.
Yeah, I know. That's why I'm so glad you're here. I wish the show was 3 hours.
I'm going to start with I don't know if your listeners will agree, but I could talk with you for more.
Well, we'll do that.
But let me start with this last point. When I came in, the city of Hartford was bankrupt. It was financially bankrupt. It was insolvent, and it had really been insolvent for some time, and the problem had been getting worse. In part because what past administrations did. I don't fault my predecessors for creating the problem. I do fault them for not shining a big bright light on the problem and say we can't solve this in a real way. And so instead, what was done was just buying time, year after year, kicking debt a little further down the road, selling off assets, doing things that didn't address the problem. And when I came in, I expected to file bankruptcy because, as you remember, this fiscal crisis for Hartford was at a time when the state of Connecticut was not in a very strong fiscal position either. So I didn't think there was going to be any cavalry coming, over the hill. So I expected to file, and we were preparing bankruptcy filings, and we were preparing the community to file. And the one thing that I felt very strongly about at the time was, if we go, we're going to do whatever we've got to do to get on a solid foundation. And if we have to file bankruptcy, we're going to do it. We're going to do it together as a community. We're going to do it in as responsible and careful a way as we can. And we're going to come through the other side, and then we're going to build, and we're going to build strong. And at the time, but I also said to the state, if you don't want the capital city to go bankrupt, then let's work together. But don't just, help us make it through another year where we live in permanent crisis. So either tell me you want me to file, which I'm prepared to do, really earnestly prepared to do, or let's work together on a longer-term fix. And as you said, that involved a lot of different things. It involved unfortunately, some really tough cuts that we made at the local level. It involved our unions coming to the table in some really big ways that I'm grateful for. It involved our companies coming to the table and making some pretty significant financial contributions beyond their taxes. And then it involved the state, assuming those long-term debt liabilities, which was only a portion of the problem. So all of that together gave us the opportunity to have a foundation that we could build on. And then we worked really hard to build it and create some confidence and growth, and started to get some real momentum coming into the pandemic, and then smacked into the pandemic wall. But so I just went on your point about the fiscal situation. But the other thing, as you said early on, that I tried to do was not to go around the towns and say, give us money, but to go to towns and say, recognize why we're all in this together.
Sure.
Recognize why this region needs to have a strong city at the center. You can't be a strong suburb of a failing city. That in any other part of the country, all 20 towns here would be one place, and we basically are one place, even though we draw the lines. And so let's recognize that, and let's work together to try to address that. And I think there's a lot of ways that we can do that. I think education is sort of the starkest and most troubling example of the disparities in our state. But there are others too. Housing as well. And on a now I'm going on for a while, but I'm going to match you, Dennis. But I would say one thing on housing. I do think when we're talking about functioning as a region, it's not just about how do you share services. It's also how do we figure out how to grow together in a way that makes sense on a regional basis. We have got a lot of towns that don't want to build housing in this state. Mm-hmm. And I wish they would build more. But we also got a lot of towns in the state that do want to build housing. And so I'd love to figure out how, as a state, we can accelerate that growth and do it in a way that is regional, that's tied to transit systems, that helps us to build sustainable public transit systems and create walkable, vibrant downtowns. That's some of the kind of regional work that I think we can do, that I hope and think everybody can get bought in on.
Well, that is great, and we're coming up to our break to have our sponsors help us out with the cost of the show. And thank you, Denny Gates and the Gates GMC. But I have been looking at the disparities between the towns that serve, like Wyndham, Willimantic, Hartford, New Haven, Bridgeport, Waterbury, the towns that serve the regions. We serve the region because we have the affordable housing, we have the subsidized housing, we have the 3 homeless shelters just in 25,000 people. This little place that's kind of hasn't got any way out. I joke, there's no way out because we don't have any major highways through here, we do serve the region. We do have a lot of nonprofits that don't pay any property tax. We have so many properties here that don't pay tax. Plus, we have so many things the state has cost shifted to the towns. And so one of the things when we get back after these messages is I'd like to do a little bit of chat on how the state shifts the cost from the state to the local municipalities, not just the ones that that serve, but they are the ones that get the biggest shift, but also to the ones to all the towns. So this is Susan Johnson. I'm here with my co-host Dennis O'Brien and our very special guest this evening, the former mayor of Hartford, Luke Bronin. Welcome back, everyone. This is Susan Johnson. I'm here with my co-host Dennis O'Brien and our very special guest, Luke Bronin, the former mayor of Hartford. And we were just talking a little bit about the cost shift from the state to the local municipalities. And I wanted to just emphasize one aspect of it because I think it's one of the easiest things to understand in terms of cost shift, and that is the special education programs all throughout the state. And what we have had back in the 70s under Governor Meskel, we had special education, and the federal government said everybody's got to provide special ed. And so we had a good tax base all throughout the state. Things were being paid for, and people didn't really understand all the special needs that really we understand today. Psychology has really developed. Behavioral health issues have really developed over the years. So there are more students that are going to qualify for special ed. Plus, we've created poverty more so without the social service programs that we used to have in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And so now we have a lot of trauma from poverty. So those children also need to be in special education programs. And then we had the PJ case, which emptied out all of our training schools into the local communities. And the state never did anything about changing the formula, which was 4.5 times the per pupil cost. And then after they met that cost, the state was supposed to kick in the 80%. And then from there, the state would pay that theoretically, which they never make the whole 80%. And then the towns would take the balance. In any event, here we are today, and we're not able to do the things we need to do. We've over and over proposed legislation to try and address this, but this is one of the things that really fits in with the mental health crisis and with all the things that we need to do. And I just wanted to show that as one cost shift. There are many others, but that, and you could just speak on that.
No, I think this is a great example of an issue that affects towns of every size across the state. This is not an urban issue, it's not a suburban issue, it's not a rural issue, it's everybody in different ways. Because in a lot of urban centers, you have a very intense concentration and a large number of students who have special education needs that we have both a moral and a legal obligation to meet. And in smaller towns, the challenge is that it's so hard to plan when you don't know what the costs are going to be. So you have a lot of small towns or smaller towns that can see their education budgets fluctuate wildly or run a deficit because of special education costs that there's no way to anticipate. And this is one of those areas where we as a state should be sharing responsibility or should be pooling, the financial risk and making the commitment as a state as a whole, because it is our obligation, and we can do it more effectively, and we can help towns of every kind by trying to tackle that. And there have been some good proposals for doing that, for some risk pooling and also addressing the issue you talk about the thresholds and the amount that the assistance is capped. But I hope this is one of those issues, unlike some of the other issues that we were talking about, Dennis, where I think there's always going to be some tension and some resistance. I hope this is one of those issues that we can move the needle on, because there ought to be a lot of alignment between communities of every kind around the state.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Small towns are definitely, I represent some small towns, they're definitely concerned about it. They had one kid moves into town, and the kid has to be outplaced and something like that. It costs an awful lot of money, and they're shocked by it. I'm not shocked by it because I grew up in the city and I'm familiar with, cities and whatnot. But I think it affects the inner urban centers more so really. But they see it that way, and they don't anticipate that kind of money. And the way it's paid out, in segments, and you get the board of. I've had issues with the boards of education fighting with the town hall, which happens everywhere to some extent. I've really worked very hard in the towns I represent to try to get people the education departments and town hall to work together, and it's so important, and it can be done. And I'm sure you did a
Well,
good job of that in Hartford.
And let me just say that I think that one of the things that we need to do is to shift how the formula for special education to something that reflects what we have with the from the Horton versus Meskel cases, creating the education cost sharing grant based on the population, based on the what the resources are in that particular town, based on what the needs are in the student population. That would be the way I would hope we'd be able to reform the payment system, so it's based on an education cost sharing grant formula as opposed to the existing one that was created by Governor Meskel in 1974.
Right.
I think it's time to make a change.
Yeah, and I agree with that, and I also think we need to fund it, make sure that we're funding it adequately. I mean,
Absolutely.
You as a legislature, you made a really important step forward last year with a bill that increased education funding across the board. It didn't end up going quite as far as I think you had fought for, among others, but it made a real difference. And unfortunately, I think one of the recent proposals from the governor scales some of that back.
Right.
I know the proposal is to put more into early childhood and child care, which I very, very much support. But I don't think it ought to be coming from K through 12 education. And I hope that where we end up this year, as this legislative session moves forward, is that we do recognize that child care is a massive, urgent, growing need for residents in our state, but we don't fund it at the expense of K through 12 education.
Thank you so much for that, because, I just have to celebrate right this moment for a minute, because part of the reason we have an either-or situation is because of the firm adherence to the so-called guardrails. And let me just say, from my position and people who represent the towns like Windham and Hartford, New Haven, Bridgeport, Waterbury, all the municipalities like ours, people understand that the guardrails need to have flexibility. I'm not saying we get rid of them. What I'm saying is when the spending cap was first put into effect under the Weicker administration, there was flexibility there, but you didn't have the volatility cap, you didn't have the bonding cap, you didn't have the revenue cap. Now we have those, and we're actually now in a situation where we have excess, you pay the debt down, which was not in place before. But we now have room, too, that's been made, some more room in the appropriations capacity to do that, because we paid a lot of the debt down, and we need to continue that. But what I'm saying is right now we have enough flexibility to pay for the early childhood without taking away from the education cost sharing grant that's finally made it to what the Horton versus Meskel requirements were under the education cost sharing grant formulas that have been upgraded as well to really reflect some of the problems that each town has. So we need to do that, and we got Senate Bill 50. And now we're going to have a hearing and appropriations on it. And so I'm very thrilled to see that, that we'll be able to get that information out to the people. We'll be able to have the hearing, and we'll see where it goes. I mean, at least we'll have a start. We'll have a head start this session. And then when we come into next session, we'll be able to, take a look at making sure we have more flexibility to make sure the kids are taken care of. That's the first step. Make sure education's covered. Make sure special needs students have their money. Make sure the districts can do what they need to do. And it'll really make a big difference in industry. And you got to figure that if CBIA says, yeah, we need more money for early childhood education, we really do need it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think it's impossible to argue that early childhood education care is a really significant need for our state. I mean, families are facing cost of living pressure across the board, but for so many families, the cost of child care is completely it makes it completely unattainable. I think you're exactly right. It's not many issues where you'll find the Connecticut Business and Industry Association working alongside the legislators that they're standing with and others to say this is a priority. But I think you're seeing that on early childhood education and care. I think you're seeing it on housing. I think you're seeing it in a number of issues where these are issues of equity, but they're also issues of economic development and about making it possible for us to grow as a state. And I think that I say this as a proud, strong Democrat. I think sometimes we as Democrats need to talk more about how we're going to promote economic growth.
Absolutely.
And we shouldn't shy away from the fact that these things that we care about because they're the right thing to do also help promote a stronger economy for our state. And I think childcare and housing are two of the best examples you can find out there. One other thing, just real quick on this, this issue of early childhood, the particular proposal that's on the table to take some of the money away from the education cost sharing, the funds and put it into the early childhood, keeps talking about that funding as magnet and charter funding. But the truth is, it's not really. It's actually hitting the bottom lines of school districts, and in many cases, it's some of the school districts with the highest need. I don't know how we got to get that word out there, but I think it's important to say that, and hopefully, we end up in a place where we're able to do the work that needs to be done on early childhood without it becoming expensive progress we've made on education.
I'd love to hear your testimony on that, and maybe in the Appropriations Committee on Senate Bill 50, or maybe on some of the other areas where we've had press conferences with State Rep Curry, who does not want to take that education cost sharing grant money that we worked so hard over the last 10 years to make sure we finally fulfilled our obligations in accordance with the new formulas. And a lot of people haven't really realized the fact that we have upgraded the formulas so that they are consistent. We don't have 10 different spending ways anymore. So we are really taking into consideration the population in each town for the ECS grants.
Although I would say I don't know that we're fully there yet. I mean, in terms of formula, we're getting closer, but in terms of continuing to make progress toward funding where we ought to be, I don't think we're quite there.
It's a big step in the right direction, and I think it was generated in part by the CJEF case. I was real proud to be a member of the steering committee of the CJEF case, which actually was won at trial. Nice decision, 100 pages, a lot of interesting stuff in it. Good job, but the Supreme Court did not see eye to eye with the trial judge, and I think that that's one of the biggest accomplishments of the legislature in the past couple of years, and I'm proud that my wife Susan Johnson played a major role in that, along with guys like Mike D'Agostino and
Representative D'Agostino. Yeah, he did a great job with it.
Right, of the progressive group in the legislature. It's exciting. It's exciting that we're doing things that are moving us in the right direction, and that's great. And I think, Luke, you're making a wonderful point that it's time that we need the kind of leadership, and you have that notion inculcated in you, that everybody from all different aspects of the state, government, business, we have to work together. We have to forget what petty differences we might have and work together, because we can. This is a great state. It's a great state, but these problems can be addressed, and we are making some progress, and we can do a lot more if we do that. And it's good. It's a good sign to see that the CBIA recognizes, and damn it, they should, that education is a vital part of their function as well.
Right. Yep.
You got to wonder, I worked really hard to change some of the problems that we have been faced with the temporary assistance for needy families, and having that 21-month cutoff, we got to 36 months, and I'm hoping next cycle I'll be able to get them to the 60 months. But we finally got them to change the computer systems and bring it up to the 36 months, and bring up the subsidies for that to the poverty level instead of 44% of poverty, which it was before, and make sure that when people are in that situation, they have that chance to get stabilized, whatever it was, whether it was a death or illness or whatever, divorce, and domestic violence. These are the things that put people in a homeless situation, not having enough resources. We never had the problems with homelessness before we went to TANF and 21 months. We never had the problems with homelessness until we got rid of the State Assisted General Assistance Program that Dennis fought so hard when he was at legal aid to make sure that we had it. But under Roland and Ganem, they ruined access to resources in that litigation, and here we are.
Well, some of those things were inevitable. Things have changed so much. I mean, I have lived long enough to remember, coming out of World War II. I was just a little kid, but I remember everybody talking about it, and I learned a lot. And I also learned a lot by paying 25 cents for a gallon of gas when I started the drive, and also going to UConn for $75 a semester, undergrad, and $300 a year law school. So the economy, because we're part of a world economy now. Back then, after World War II, we had it all to ourselves, really, and people need to understand that it's not as simple as it used to be. But we've talked a lot about issues and stuff, and we've talked a lot about all that you've accomplished in relatively few years. And I was a slower developer, and I grew up in the city. And anyway, you've accomplished so much, and you're now, you just left the mayoral position earlier this year, right?
Yep, just when the clock struck midnight on the new year.
That's right. I remember when I left the probate court when I got to be too old, and I didn't think I was too old, but the law said so. It's in the charter. I mean, it's in the Constitution. Yeah. Anyway. What's up now with you, and what are your plans?
So right now I'm doing a bunch of different things. I mean, first of all, I'm sleeping better at night.
All right, bravo!
I'm getting to enjoy snowstorms again.
Stuff I used to dream about. So I still do. Yeah, I'm still working.
I used to love snow, and then for 8 years I hated it, and now I can love it again.
I don't like it very
much. I'm doing a combination of things. I'm teaching law school.
Yeah.
I'm doing a little bit of consulting work, doing some policy work on a number of issues that I care about. Yep. And then I think I've said in other places that we're a ways away from 2026, and we don't know what Governor Lamont is going to do yet. But if Governor Lamont ultimately decides not to run, then I think I would probably run for governor. And it's work that I love. I love building a team.
Sure.
I love trying to tackle tough problems, and I have really strong feelings about things we can do in the state. I agree with you. We have a great state, and I think we're making some really important progress on a lot of fronts. And I also think there's some things that we need to tackle with a little bit more urgency.
Yeah, I think people need to recognize what we all three of us recognize is that we do have some structures that are archaic. In our state, in terms of the number of towns and number of school districts and whatnot, but if we once we recognize that, I mean that should give us more impetus to say we've got to work together. We have to work within that system, and we've got to work together like you have been suggesting during our whole show to all segments of the economy, all segments of the state community work together and try to get things done in a reasonable, sensible, practical way, so that everybody gets a chance at the American dream here in Connecticut, which will lift us all up.
Yeah, and I think that I think that back to the point we were talking about needing to talk about growth. We as a state we have a lot of great things happening, but if you look at our economic growth as a state and our population growth of the state, we're still lagging. We're still near the bottom, not just compared to Sunbelt states, but compared even to New England. And if we want to be able to deliver the kind of services that our communities deserve, if we want to be able to pay off our meet our pension obligations in the future, if we want to be able to keep towns from having to raise property taxes year after year, we have to make sure that we allow our state to grow, and I do think there are some things that we can do to help that happen. I know I've said keep coming back to housing, but I really do think that housing is one of the biggest issues in the state. And it's not just an issue of affordable housing, although we absolutely need more affordable units, low income affordable units, but we also just need more housing supply across the board. Right. We need places where a kid who's gone to college in state and wants to stay in state can find a place to live, where Electric Boats have got 5,000 open jobs, can find a place for the folks they're trying to recruit to live. It's an economic development issue. It's a quality of life issue. I think for a lot of people, at a certain point, one of the biggest quality of life issues is that you want to live near your kids or your grandkids. And we're increasingly a state where you can't do it because there's no place your kids or grandkids can afford to live. And so I think that that's an example of one of those issues where I really do think we can build a coalition of a lot of people coming at it from a lot of different angles and try to move the needle in a bigger way so that our state can both do the right thing and also grow economically by doing it.
Our producer, Matt Rupar, has signaled us that we have about a minute and a half left of the show. So it's time for you to make your final final statement.
Final statement.
You said a lot, and I'm really impressed, and
Just for the show.
I've learned a lot. Final statement for the show. Oh, sorry, I left that out. Okay, I didn't want to be misunderstood, but that's all the time.
No, I just really appreciate, I think this is the third time or so that I've come on the show over the years, and I really, really appreciate these conversations always because they're both a lot of fun and touch on a lot of issues that really matter. And I think there are a lot of ways in which the city that I led for 8 years and this community here are very similar. Maybe different sizes, but a lot of the challenges, a lot of the issues are actually shockingly similar.
Yes.
And so I've always appreciated the partnership, and Susan, always appreciated your work that you've been doing in recent years, and Dennis, the work you've done, throughout your career, and both of you together to try to make our state, fairer and stronger, and a lot of work left to do.
Well, thank you so much, Luke Bronin, former mayor of Hartford. We really appreciate you being here, and we hope you come back and chat with us some more, because I think a lot of your experiences and ours working together, love to see your testimony on some of my bills that I proposed back the last few years. Very much appreciated, and it all has to do with making sure we have equity throughout our state and make sure that the towns are all being treated equitably. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And come tune in next week for another great show on Let's Talk About It.
Thanks a lot, Luke. Thanks for joining us here on Let's Talk About It. And thanks, Susan, Matt. We've had a great time. Thanks.
Thank you both.